Hello everyone, and welcome to the 113th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring our patron pick for February 2023, Koba, from the planet of the Apes. A hardened and tortured bonobo ape navigating a new life of freedom, Koba serves as the perfect foil to this series' protagonist, Caesar, an ape who sympathizes with the species that has caused his own people much harm because of the love and compassion he experienced from his human caretakers. Koba was given no such love, and in this video, we're going to explore the brutal circumstances that Koba found himself in, situations that caused his heart to turn irrevocably towards the hatred of humans. And to do that, we'll be looking at the information we're given about Koba's backstory in the novel Dawn of the Planet of the Apes Firestorm, as well as all that we're given about him in the 3 films that have been made in this reboot series thus far. Now without further ado, let's begin. Koba began his life as a lab animal, much like any other does, in human captivity. Raised at a primate research facility, Koba was fortunate enough in his early years to be reared by both his biological mother and a kind and compassionate caretaker named Mary. Because Koba was brought up around humans and he learned to communicate through sign language, Koba assumed that he was human and that other apes who couldn't sign were completely different creatures, ones that he dubbed big black caterpillars. Koba at this time was playful and childlike, and he was regularly given positive stimulation from his caretakers in the form of games and toys, developing one such game with a man named Kuo, who would attempt to leash Koba as he dashed away from him, something that brought Koba a lot of joy. Suffice to say, Koba was happy, cared for, and compassionate towards who he believed to be his fellow humans during these early stages of his life. However, the dark road Koba would be sent down that would transform him into the beast we see in the films would begin after Kuo was replaced by a newcomer, a man named Roger. Roger was not kind, nor was he compassionate. Instead, Roger likely viewed his position at the facility as just another job, and the beings that he cared for were just another set of dumb animals locked in a cage. To top it off, Roger was an alcoholic, and because he viewed the apes he cared for as nothing more than filthy animals, he was abusive to them as well. When Koba tried to play the same game he had played with Kuo with Roger, he found that his resistance to his commands was only met with rage, which terrified the young Koba and caused him to panic, which sent Roger flying to the ground. Later that night, in a drunken stupor, Roger approached Koba in his mother's enclosure with a beer in one hand and a sack of oranges in the other, so he might teach the young ape a lesson. However, his mother quickly came to his defense and attacked Roger. Sadly, this would be the undoing of Koba's mother, and upon waking up in the morning, Koba found her cold and stiff, with her eyes wide open. Koba attempted to wake his mother, who he thought was just sleeping with her eyes open, as he had never encountered death before, and so he couldn't understand the gravity of this situation. After weeks of depression, Koba was given some unfortunate news by Mary that their research facility had lost its funding, and she would now be separated from Koba, though she assured him that he would be going to a good place. Of course, this proved to be false, and Koba was taken to the home of a man named Tommy, a Hollywood producer who ran a show called Monkey of the House, who was also an alcoholic. Tommy was in possession of another ape named Milo, and to prepare both Milo and Koba for his show, he would force them to perform tricks, beating them or electrocuting them with a cattle prod should they disobey or stumble. Here is where Koba would acquire one of his most defining features, his grizzly scar and blind milky eye, as Tommy, in one of his rages, slashed Koba across the face and then put his cigarette out in the eye he had just maimed to ensure that Koba would become blind in it. After enduring countless beatings and torture, Koba and Milo would meet with more misfortune when Milo assaulted a boy who was harassing him on the set of their show, biting a portion of his nose off as he defended himself. This would cause Monkey in the House to eventually be taken off the air, and in a state of drunken depression, Tommy starved both Milo and Koba to the brink of death. Fortunately for Milo and Koba, and not so fortunately for Tommy, Tommy would decide to take his own life, briefly threatening Koba with a gun before turning it on himself. So, Milo and Koba were allowed to rejuvenate themselves, and after living for perhaps years without ever seeing the sun, these two apes found the resolve to free themselves from their prison. However, the authorities soon became aware of Tommy's suicide and sent animal control to take the two apes off to an unknown fate, another set of masters ready to abuse them to replace the old. Koba attempted to reason with these people through sign language, and when that failed, he made a valiant effort to escape, running past them to freedom and up a tree so he might touch the skies he had once once dreamed when he was still with his mother. Of course, Koba was soon apprehended and shot to the ground with a tranquilizer dart, and upon waking from his dark slumber, he once again found himself confined to a cold and grimy cage. This time, his handlers would be in a much more gruesome business, scientific experimentation, and Koba was forced to undergo numerous experiments at many different labs during this time period, finding refuge only once in the care of a man named Amal, who worked under Jacobs of Genesis, though his time under his care was brief and unrewarding. Because Koba wasn't able to communicate with anyone at the lab, he developed many self-destructive habits that stemmed from his overall feeling of despair, like pulling his hair out and signing his hands into the ground until they were bruised and bloody. And by the time that we encounter Koba in the first film, he's accepted his fate and views himself as nothing more than his pain and his cage. It only makes sense at this point that Koba would develop unrelenting hatred towards human beings, and his desire to inflict the same pain they had inflicted on him was ever present in Koba's mind. Although he was never given much of an opportunity to do so, Koba knew that he might be able to expend his rage on one person in particular, Jacobs, the man who treated him in a similar way that Tommy and Roger before him had. In pursuit of this vendetta, Koba actually achieved ultimate revenge against the human race without knowing it, as when he tried to reach out and assail Jacobs when he was being filled with the ALZ-113 virus, he infected Robert Franklin, which eventually was the cause of the near extinction of the human race. After gaining the same intelligence granted to his ape brethren by the simian flu and being freed by Caesar, Koba assisted his new comrades in escaping from San Francisco so they could establish a haven for themselves in the wilderness. And while all the apes in this scenario are in one way or another responsible for the deaths of several humans, Koba makes sure to finish off Jacobs himself. And as we can see, this was very satisfying for Koba. This moment, along with what we know of Koba's life prior to his release, foreshadowed much of the behavior he displays in the following film. 10 years following their escape from captivity, the apes have created a prosperous but primitive hunter-gatherer society, and by all accounts, they were well on their way to advancing that society. However, the apes had assumed that humans had become all but extinct, and upon discovering that they hadn't, the apes found themselves faced with a crucial dilemma. What should they do about their old enemy resurfacing once more? They had but two options: continue to exist as they had been for the last 10 years, broker a truce with the humans, and defend their home if necessary, or go to war. This sparked a furious debate, and both sides of this argument were led by Caesar and Koba respectively. And initially, because of Caesar's role in giving Koba his new life after he freed him, Koba's love and respect for his leader overshadowed his desire to wage war on the humans. However, as time went on, Caesar began to show weakness, that weakness being his sympathy towards their former masters and his desire to coexist with them. And so Koba's love took a backseat to his fear and anger, and this caused him to hatch a plot wherein he would free the apes of both Caesar and the humans by killing Caesar with a gun and taking control of the apes himself. In the process, Koba showed himself to be remarkably cunning, manipulative, and organized, even managing to turn Caesar's own son against him for a time and obtaining weapons from the humans by playing the fool after he successfully rallied a number of apes to his cause. After he took control of the apes, Koba waged his war against the humans and was met with a great amount of success, ruling over his flock as a tyrant and exhibiting an enormous amount of sadism and brutality towards his enemy as well as his fellow apes, as when one of the apes refuses to execute an enemy human, Koba murders him without a second thought, breaking the apes not kill apes rule that was set by Caesar and setting a new example to his new kingdom, just as his caretakers had set an example with him in the past. However, Caesar was not an ape to be taken down so easily, and after returning from near death, he put a stop to his old friend. Now this is essentially who Koba was, a poor and abused creature who essentially became hatred incarnate, and his betrayal of Caesar and the subsequent loss of life that occurred during his attempted war are inexcusable and wrong. However, what I think we need to discuss here, more than anything, is the reason why Koba was so adamant about going to war, and whether or not he was in the wrong for desiring to do so, or if Caesar was for choosing not to. Now, in this early stage of an intelligent species forming their own society, if we ask ourselves how humans would handle this situation, the likely answer is that we would overwhelmingly choose to exterminate these intelligent apes by any means necessary. Why is that, you ask? Well, because human society relies on our dominance over this planet, and if there were any species intelligent enough to match our own intellect, and with the capability to use it in a similar way that we do, they would ultimately be a threat to our existence. Sure, if time progressed, and we eventually reached the point that the world reaches in the old Planet of the Apes films, we could learn to coexist with this species and end the cycle of destruction that we see occurring in those films, especially when that species is so similar to us. But as you'll notice, to get to that point, there was a lot of strife, misery, and destruction, and I imagine that that would be unavoidable. So with that in mind, during the early stages of this new society's formation, there would always be the potential for relations between the two species to sour, or for one group to desire to achieve dominance over the other. So no matter what, at least during this time period, they would always be a threat to us. Even though this idea is very morally gray, it stands to reason that the proper course of action for us to take would likely be to again exterminate that species so we could ensure our survival. Now, if that's the case for us, imagine if you were that other species. It would be even more imperative for them to find a way to assert their dominance over the powerful so they could secure their fledgling existence. And that's how it is for the apes in this series. While it is possible for humans and apes to coexist, as we can see in the second film in the series, it was all but inevitable that the remaining humans would eventually seek to eliminate the apes, not only because they pose a challenge to our mastery over the world on a societal level, but because of the potential that they have for decimating the already struggling human population virally, as they had in the past. So, while I definitely wouldn't want to find myself staring down an army of apes that were ready to massacre everyone I know and love, Koba might actually be in the right here in suggesting that the apes go to war. That doesn't mean they necessarily should have gone to war at that very moment, but they probably should have been planning to do so in the future, as there's no way their society could be secure so long as humans posed essentially the same threat to them that they had prior to their freedom. This sentiment is echoed in Caesar's struggle in the following film with the continued deaths of many apes in the protracted war that Koba started, a war that was again probably inevitable, and one that unfortunately claimed the lives of his wife and son. And we see Caesar having hallucinations of Koba several times throughout the film as he attempts to cope with the loss of his family and the continued threat that the humans pose to his clan's existence. Now, this is a complicated situation, and the question of what the proper course of action for the apes to take here is one that may or may not have a correct answer, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on this matter down below. Who knows what the future holds for Caesar and his flock, but one thing's for certain, Koba's influence will likely hang heavy over every ape under his care for quite some time. A reminder of the unfortunate reality that an intelligent being who is exposed to an unimaginable amount of torture and experimentation can become a monster just as any other intelligent being who was exposed to the kind of treatment Koba was might, as many humans who have gone through less than he had have turned out much worse. Unfortunate beings who have been molded by the unforgiving shadow of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Koba? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, to my patrons, and to anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.